All right. Nolynn Powell, welcome. Thank you for being here. We did this once before and you had an instrument break, so
Yes.
we had to end the interview, and now we're restarting again. We're back. This is the Environmental Lab podcast. I'm Mike Gomer. Our guest is Nolynn Powell, who is the lab director for CleanWater Labs in North Carolina. Welcome, Nolynn.
Hello, thank you.
Yeah, so I want to hear a little bit about you and your background. How did you get your start? What is your science background? Where did it come from? Give me the background on you.
Sure. So I went to North Carolina State University. That's the university in Raleigh here in North Carolina. That's our state capital. Um, so I went in for marine science and I worked in a lab for 2 years there under my PI. We worked on harmful algal blooms and doing testing on cyanotoxins. So that was what my undergrad project was. I did
What
a
does that
research.
mean? What does that mean? Harmful algal blooms. Tell me.
So have you heard of the red tide in Florida?
Yeah.
So that is so the phytoplankton, for some reasons, we're not quite sure yet, will sometimes release toxins. And it could be a couple of different factors, but they haven't determined what exactly. So they may be releasing toxins to compete with other phytoplankton, or they may be doing it to deter predators, or maybe just when they get into a mass, so we don't really know yet, but when they're in those big groups, they'll release toxins. And then, if you're walking on the beach during the red tide, and you can kind of smell the toxins in the area. So there'll be sanotoxin, anatoxin, BMAA, anatoxin, and those can be liver or lung toxins. Yeah, so I wasn't in Florida, but I did research on the algae out here in private lakes and near the coast. So we were mostly getting data of how many algae cells were there and what toxins they were releasing. So I created these traps that used hydrophobic resin, that as the water flowed through the resin, it would collect the toxins, and then we would test for it. Yeah. So
Fascinating.
it's crazy stuff. So
Yeah.
it's still something that's being explored. But yeah, so I graduated from there, and then I moved out here to Western North Carolina. I worked at a tomato farm doing genetics research, and then I did part-time at a trout farm research, looking for water quality differences at the entrance and then the exit of the raceways.
So that's your first introduction to water testing.
That is my first introduction to water testing. It was for pretty much making sure that the fish poop wasn't affecting the water quality of the stream. So what a raceway for the trout, because they always have to keep moving. So they would divert a stream, and then it would go down these concrete raceways, and then the water would go into a different types of a collection pond or a water treatment system, and then it would go back into the stream. So we had to it was kind of like a government contract. So we were making sure that what was coming out was not as dirty as what was in the water. So
Excellent.
that was kind of the start of my water testing, and then the pandemic happened. And since those were university funded, that just kind of completely ended. And then in 2020, I applied to be a lab tech here at CleanWater Lab. I had, my research experience at NC State, and then a little bit of lab stuff at the tomato job.
Yeah.
So I didn't really work with bacteria in college or after I graduated, but the knowledge transferred a little bit. So yeah, that's how I started at.
I feel like you're one of many that have been impacted in the pandemic career-wise, that has shifted something for you or changed your focus. I feel like so many people that I talk to, that's the same scenario.
It's crazy to think where I would have been if, all that research didn't get shut down. But also it is nice having a job that isn't grant funded, because, grants can disappear just as fast as they appear. So
now you're at CleanWater Labs, and what is the focus of CleanWater Labs? Kind of tell me what your niche is, what you bring to your customers?
So we do kind of two different sides of it. The first is foodborne pathogen testing using DNA analysis, and then the other half is water quality testing in drinking water. So I feel like the more niche part is the DNA analysis. That's something that's not done often because it's not like the minimum, it's not the bare requirements. That's something that's more advanced that farms can take part in if they really want to show their food safety. So it's like the top of the line technology using DNA analysis to find the foodborne pathogens in, right now we do sprouts, and then we do environmental swabbing. So facilities that have packing houses, or if they're moving like fresh cut produce, they need to swab their environment to make sure there's no bacteria. And we can test for that using our technology. And then on the drinking water side, we can do testing for kind of just the basics that you find in well water. There's a lot of well water out here in Western North Carolina, which is something I had no idea about, from the coast. And then when we moved to Raleigh, that's just all city water, right? So when I moved out here and learned how to drink well water, I was like, this is like crazy. Like other half of people just live off of water they get from the ground, that they don't have to do anything to. They don't have to filter. So a lot of people don't know how dangerous well water can be. So we're here to make sure the water that they're drinking is clean.
Where's that gap? I talk to a lot of folks like this in this interview style, and a common theme is consumers are uneducated about what it's a utility, right? So you just expect what comes out of your faucet is going to be good for me, be good for my kids, be good for my family. It's just kind of this expectation that we have, but there seems to be a real gap in knowledge. Why do you think that is?
I don't know where it's coming from, because I feel like, to me, if you're buying a house, the realtor should be the one to inform you, like, hey, this is well water and it's not like city water, what you may be used to. But a lot of times the people who live out here on well water, they've lived here so long and they're like, oh, I've been drinking this water for 40 years, it's fine. And there's nobody to do the education, like because the wells are private, there's no regulations for them unless they're on like a school system or like a church. If you're feeding or letting a bunch of people drink the water, then you have to have it tested. But municipal homes, they don't have to. So the realtors don't know about well water, and then the homeowners don't know about well water, and we really don't see them until there's a problem, or like they're like, oh, this water, suddenly the aesthetics has changed, or I'm getting sick, and then that's when they come in, and that's when I tell them you should at a minimum just be like testing like once a year, just to check, because bacteria, you can't taste it, you can't smell it, but nobody knows that. So I don't know, it's like I don't know whose responsibility it is to do that. And a lot of times people don't want to spend money on things they don't think they need. But if if you're sick, then it's like kind of too late. Like you could have been checking before.
We're very reactive. And I'm guilty of this too. Everyone reacts to these things. And I hope that part of this conversation and these kind of interviews is trying to get a little bit more education out, at least to our networks, and people who aren't scientists and work in a lab like you do.
Right.
Or help labs like I do. So I think getting out of that reactive state is important. And there's all this news about PFAS has changed. I think regular consumers outside of our industry that you and I work in are getting to feel this really for one of the first times, because media reaches so much more than it ever did. And it is putting concern in the back of people's minds about what is in the water that I'm drinking and just taking for granted, what is in the air that I'm breathing in my house, from a mold perspective, all these things. So I can really see it being something that changes. I think it could change the volume that you see in your lab of testing as homeowners start and consumers start to come in and want to understand more about what's going on in their water. So I think there's a big impact that could be coming to us. Do you agree?
I agree mostly. I don't appreciate like any fear mongering though, like
Mm-hmm.
especially with the PFAS. It's not like if a well is constructed fine, like or is newer, you aren't gonna get PFAS in your water. Like you're not supposed to. And so I always feel bad when people call and they're like, I want to test for PFAS. And I'm like, okay, well, there's like hundreds of different types of PFAS. Like, do you know like specifically what you want to test for? And they don't understand that there's like so many different kinds. And to test for like one is super expensive and only like Pace Analytical does it, because it's a newer technology to be able to test for that. And it's really expensive. And so I just feel like there's like slight fear mongering now.
Sure.
And because
I mean,
people
it's the media.
yeah.
There always is that, and it works on me, right? I'm a father. I've got a 5-year-old, almost 5-year-old, and an almost 2-year-old, and now I'm nervous for reasons that I don't know. And the reality is, there's PFAS in my toothbrush. There's PFAS in probably the shirt.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. Not that that's an okay thing, and I think that as a whole, we should be focused on remediating that process with some, government guidance like the
Right.
EPA is doing. But I'm also not sitting here being like, nobody drink the water. Let's get a storage unit of canned goods in case the world's going to end. But I am thinking about it more for better or worse.
Yeah. I just feel like sometimes the fear mongering is kind of like putting the attention to like things it shouldn't be. Because a lot of times people call and they're like, my neighbor is like using fertilizer. And I'm like, yeah, it's not your neighbor though. That's the problem. It's these big, huge companies that used to use it in like the 70s, 90s. And then I know that the newer PFAS are supposed to be like better, but they're not. And we're going to find out in like 20 years that they're as bad as the original ones.
Yeah.
So
you're saying that I've got a well. I call you. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm looking out the window and my neighbor's using fertilizer. Now my well is going to be contaminated or corrupted or whatever.
And
yeah.
So a lot of my job is just talking to the public and letting them know, don't panic. Like we have a basic test. We test for nitrates and nitrites, and those are found naturally in soil. So what we do is if somebody calls like really nervous about, there's like fertilizer in my water, somebody was like spraying crops, we're like, well, let's test for these nitrates and nitrites. And if they're in a high abundance in your well, then what's in the soil is getting into your well. And because when I see wells that are newer, I don't see really any nitrates or nitrites. And that's because the well is working, right? It's naturally filtering everything through the ground. But if it's in a high abundance, that means there's a leak somewhere. And then if there's that leak, then maybe something that's being sprayed or dumped in the water can make its way into the well. But to save money and to save people from panicking, we'll do the nitrates and nitrites and the bacteria. And I'll be like, well, these aren't in your well, so your well is okay. And
so education is a big part of your job for your customers.
yes.
Where do you learn? Where do you get your information from?
There's a really great so the Michigan Department of Health is fantastic. Because Michigan has a lot of problems with wells. We're pretty protected out here in North Carolina. I don't know if you've looked at like the topography, but our mountains protect us from like the Mississippi rivers. So our waters are a lot different than like what you'll see up north and to the west. So we're pretty lucky. Like we don't have really issues with radon. We don't have issues that a lot of people up north do. So the Department of Michigan, they deal with all of that. So they have really great resources. And then there's also another resource called, I should look this up. I think it's called the Private Well Course. They put out like materials like every couple of weeks. They'll do like, I think there's one tomorrow that's like what well or what environmental quality professionals need to know about private wells kind of thing. So we continuously watch those, and a lot of times it's the same material, but to keep it fresh in our minds, we'll watch it and then The continuing education we do, since we're like, a small private lab, we're not required to do continuing education like government jobs are, but we'll do them, and we'll make sure it's specific to wells or environmental quality people, or just like drinking water and private water. So I learned from that, and then just following like the EPA, Water Quality Association on like social media.
Got it. Okay, that's great. That's good information. So this is good background. So back to your lab now. Kind of what are your objectives, short term and maybe over the next 5 years? What are the goals of your lab, and what are you guys looking to accomplish maybe differently than you're doing now?
I think short-term goals would just be to get more clients in on our private water testing side. I would like there to be more of people coming in just kind of for their yearly check instead of something's wrong. Can you tell me what's wrong? Or just letting people know that they could just be doing like a simple check every year. And that would give them like maybe some peace of mind. Or just say, I mean, a lot of times it's like there'll be bacteria in the well, but people have drank it for so long that they don't get sick anymore because your body just kind of gets used to it. But like if someone is like elderly or immunocompromised or pregnant or a baby, like they could get sick, or you just have people come visit. So I think education and outreach on that side would be short term. I think long term, we would like to, so I think there's more regulations coming down from the federal government for water testing requirements for farms. So that would be long-term goal. Is a lot of times farmers don't like to do things until they're required. But if we can get them to do it now, then when their auditors come, they'll be ready. So getting that out there to farmers, letting you know that we're here. And then I think getting another farm getting into finished product testing is going to be our next big goal. Right now we do. What's that?
That's great. It feels to me like there's a couple things for you. It's education and growth. Like you want to serve your community, and you're such a righteous, and a good person. Your motivation is to serve your people of your community, which I really admire about you, and it's obvious.
It's hard being a scientist and a business owner. Well, I guess I'm a business owner, but person that runs a business. Because my first obligation is to the people, and is not to make money, which is not great when you run a business. But like if somebody's going to call and they are like, I want to test my water, but they're like, like an hour away from me. I'm like, well, I have a lab that's closer, because I would rather them test their water and get answers than see our price for like how far we are and be like, never mind, I'm not going to do it. Or if somebody calls to like, to get testing done, and they are like, I want to do all these tests, and I'll tell them, well, I don't think you need all of this. Because you have newer pipes, you have new like PVC pipes. You're not going to have that copper contamination. So, which loses us money, but I'm not here to.
I don't think it loses you money in the long term. I think you're gaining credibility with the people, and that's why they trust you, and that's why they appreciate you, and that's why they'll leverage your expertise and your support, long term. So I think you're doing it right. I think your motivations are correct. It is a constant pressure of serve the people and make the money. Those two things are competing, and they both have to happen. So I think you're on the right track. All right. So you're just for anybody that wants to reach out to you or learn more about you, your website, remind me, what is it? CleanWater?
It's cwlabtech.com.
cwlabtech.com. Check it out. Clean Water in North Carolina. Nolynn Powell, you are a lab director. It was wonderful to have you as a host. You're one of my favorite people in the industry.
Awesome.
And I'm excited to see you meet your goals, serve the people, grow the business in a reasonable way. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you.